shows
connection
that
now.
the screen is black. Yep. Not exactly sure if we could be heard right now.
Well, I mean, everything's running on my end. And we're picking up audio.
And I'm waiting for it to load on mine. Okay, yep, it's live. It's live.
Okay.
We got it. Yeah, I literally haven't right now sorry, we started in the middle of a session. We're just setting things up behind the scenes, but all right. Hey everybody. How are y'all doing? We decided well, first of all, I just wanted to start off because I was continuing this train of thought in the background here. I don't know if any of you, how many of you are in the Backalley Discord server, but we have a channel called Fake Libertarian Posting, and because I felt like, it would be probably, because this was a spicy comment, I felt like that'd be a fun way to start the stream. I could just say what I was gonna write here. That, there's a comment from a objectivist, a Randian, that somebody screenshotted and posted in there, which if you want to check the Backalley server after this, it's basically just a sophisticated, what it proves that the entire of objectivism very nakedly on its face is just, as I've been saying, a sophisticated way of some lady tricking herself using the Socratic method into believing that other people need to care about her opinions. That is I'll display it on the screen, or I'll send it to Heretic so he can so that I've mentioned it.
Okay, so I just domed this guy.
I'm sending it
and they kind of just stood there and took it. Didn't even realize I was there, and I wasn't even trying to do anything stealthy. I'll try to put it on screen when I can.
Dang. Syndicate thug. I have seen way too much fucking let's say terminally online content relating to Pokemon, because the very first thoughts that I had were not anything that should be associated with Pokemon.
Understandable. I will not ask you to elaborate any further.
Yeah, I wasn't going to anyway.
So is this like Skyrim? I actually just discovered this. Is this like Skyrim where I can just go into stealth mode? These rocks have bullshit hitboxes.
But yeah, I'm watching the gameplay right now. I can see right now why everybody loves it. It's like Breath of the Wild meets Skyrim meets like Lost Planet or Monster Hunter as far as gameplay goes.
It's also got a
bit it's seriously just somebody took like it's seriously just somebody taking like the idea of ideas and then making it into a game. Like, it's just, what I mean by that is it's like the coolest idea for a game ever, and it was executed perfectly. So it's the first time in a while I'm going to agree with everybody else, except for the people whose opinions don't matter and say that it's a great game. and by that I mean the Twitter users who basically are just mad about people making things that others actually enjoy because it threatens their ability to continue making money off Coomers through their art.
I don't think that's actually it.
Those are the kinds of people that I'm referring to. And since I can actually prove that most of the time their opinions are motivated by self-interest because of the fact that they are Twitter artists, yeah, that's what I mean when I say their opinion isn't worth considering. I mean, literally, that it's just a signal, basically, that they're using from their perspective to try to weaponize the sense of social validation against you, because they think that that's going to make you stop disagreeing with them on Twitter. So literally, their opinion is just a mechanism to try to get you to stop disagreeing with them. It's not something that they even genuinely believe. Or if they do believe it, it has nothing to do with why they're telling you that.
I actually disagree with that. Just not for the reasons that are immediately obvious, though. My reasoning is just that for a lot of people, like the majority of people who are complaining about Palworld online are unfortunately not Twitter artists. Twitter artists are upset about it, but I mean, what aren't Twitter artists upset about these days? The thing that they seem to be having is
Just other people existing, basically.
it's a bit more. I think it's actually a bit more complicated than that. My
I've
understanding.
seen Twitter artists trying. I've seen Twitter artists trying to take the IP angle, but that's exactly. I'm sorry. You go ahead and continue. That's all I wanted to clarify.
Yeah,
Is that I'm aware of that.
yeah. I mean, they're using it as a justification, but I'm not really going to take that opinion seriously that they are concerned about IP. I mean, let's be honest here. Nobody cares about IP unless they can use that specifically as a bludgeon against other people. Now, what's up here? So,
Yeah, they're just using it because they know that. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah,
I thought you were done.
I'm sorry, I wasn't quite finished yet. So, what I've noticed
No, no,
is
go ahead.
that
Didn't mean to.
the what's it called? My train of thought is completely derailed at this point, and I'm pretty sure it's poisoned all of East Palestine. Anyways, so
No.
I've noticed that with a lot of people, their anger and being upset really only started to come about once Palworld was released. Because like this game was, although it was like it is an indie developed project for all intents and purposes, this was not like something that just came out of the blue. Like they were doing trailers, they were releasing content about it related to it, and so this was not unknown. But not. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not entirely clear what it is that pissed people off. But I think my my theory as to what it is has to do with the way in which people believe that entertainment emerges, like just in general. So what I mean by that is, why do you think Pokemon exists? Like, or just like Pokemon games just get made at all? That's kind of a rhetorical question. I don't actually expect you to answer that, but the idea is just like, hey, IP. IP is what allows games to be made. That's a very basic understanding of it that isn't even close to what's actually true, but what the truth actually is has no relevance to people's belief about it. So as such, they look at something
Yeah.
that's a genuine competitor to probably like one of the largest franchises in the history of entertainment ever, and they assume that the destruction of that IP, a process that has been ongoing for several years now, well before Palworld's release, just simply because the game has been like hilariously mismanaged, and they see that as just like that means that there's not going to be any
Yeah.
more Pokemon games and stuff like that. That guy's got 1 HP. That guy's got 1 HP. Can I catch him? No, I can't.
But yeah, the reason why I mostly just even then the reason why I still just chalk it up to Twitter artists primarily is that when I look at the people that are talking like promoting that specific narrative of, oh well, this is threatening Nintendo's IP. First of all, I see every single time they're fucking Twitter artists, so I have a hard time believing that their perceived investment in the defense of IP isn't motivating their like perspective in why they signal that, considering that literally everything else that they signal is essentially just a mechanism they think that they're going to use to maneuver their way through social circles and get what they want out of people. So that's the main reason I came to that conclusion. But yes, I've heard that defense as well, and I think it goes without saying that there basically just is no basis in the actual study of property for a concept like IP, because IP is not a dispute over a resource that exists. It's a dispute over what other people can do with their resources in practice, and that's what it will always be, because ideas aren't scarce. The only thing that's actually scarce and being disputed are resources being acted on.
Mm-hmm. We've actually talked about that in.
So,
Sorry.
I just. Sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, like, we've touched on that in videos we've made years in the past, where ideas aren't scarce. They can just be endlessly replicated. Endlessly. Now, what is actually scarce is the paper that a story might be written on, or the CDs, or whatever, that music can be written on. But the actual
And to
ideas,
clarify, just sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was kind of just finishing up my point. That's what's scarce, not the freaking. That's what it is scarce, not the freaking idea itself. However, because people have been indoctrinated, because that's what it is, for so long, in what counts as property, just essentially being an abstract concept, that they genuinely have no point of reference for dichotomizing what does and does not count as property, such that people. I'm sorry, my thoughts are all over the place right now. So all I was trying to say is just that ideas aren't scarce. The paper is. You can steal a book. The book is stolen because it's removed from the previous possessor's, possession. You try to do that with something else, though, it's not going to work.
Yeah, and all I was going to say is if someone is watching this stream who feels like I am describing them when I use the phrase Twitter artist, but their mentality is what I'm describing is not their mentality, do not feel lumped in with the people I'm talking about. If you are cognizant of the fact that the behavior I'm describing is a problem, then you are not in that category of person. So don't feel like that was personal. If it's not even personal when it's directed at them, because more so what I want is not for anything to happen, just more so for that shit to stop and for people to stop pretending like they're only interested in things to maintain their own something they think they have a sense of self-interest in, because it's exactly the mentality that corpos are following nowadays for different reasons. From the perspective of corpos, everything's ingenuine because of how little risk they can take in actually making anything, because of how fucking hard it is to continue running a production company in the modern media environment. That's the main reason. That's the main reason for why this behavior emerges in the logic of production models in the white market. But for for people, it's just the byproduct of the socially engineered incentives that's created in the last decade. It's made it so trying to basically engineer the description of the incentives created during the Stalin era in the Soviet Union, but through the wage system instead. Instead of making it so people have to live together and incentivizing people to snitch on one another when they're living with each other, now it's socially engineering the exact same incentives through the white market. making so everybody has a fucking parasocial relationship with each other. I'm sorry that kind of bled into some issues I've been like dealing with since the end of the first stream that I suppose I could get into, but I don't know. Don't really feel like doing it on stream.
I
But
don't
it
think
is,
I
but
don't think
yeah,
it'd
it
be a
is
very
a.
interesting thing to get into on stream.
It's not. No, 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 it's not, and that's why, from that perspective, I'm not going to. But that's why I'm thinking about it, is because that kind of opened up some stuff that we had to deal with. But I've been reflecting on just how many things are like that, even outside of to the point where your perception of your sense of self gets gamed by it, because how to perceive yourself is itself gamed by rules outside of your perception. It's like it's no wonder that people need drugs in order to figure themselves out. Because yeah, the brain kind of at this point, because of all of the things in your environment that are just attacking you and constantly trying to keep you in an emotionally invested state, you can't think about anything with any clarity ever, unless you're meditating, basically. So that's the state of the white market. You can't tell me it's not collapsing.
There's it's certainly going out of its way to go into death throes, and I think it should actually demonstrate pretty clearly like just how bad things have gotten. That now the very act of what is needed to be able to get out of that is itself commodified. Where just think about the concept of meditation lessons that you pay for. How do you pay for it? You get a white market job. How do you get a white market job? Well, you need a fixed address. A fixed address. See the problem yet?
Yeah. Well, and that's just the basic rules in beginning to identify it. But yeah, it's very, what I learned is, from if your brain is currently emulating an emotional bias associated with something, then you're not going to be able to study it, no matter how hard you try within your own thought process. You have to basically figure out how to foil the rules of your own ego in relation to that line of reasoning before you can even begin to reflect on whatever it's associated with. That's essentially the key to why it seems like it's so difficult to fight this state, despite the fact that, as we pointed out in the last stream, and pointed out to anybody who's been willing to listen over the last couple of years, that we could literally show you step by step what would be required to undo everything that it's established. It's just that people have people don't see it from that perspective. They just see morality as the limit. They just see morality within the context of existing behavioral norms as the limit of what a society is, and don't ever question it because they have an investment in something that's maintained because of it. It's not that they can't question it. It's that they don't want to. That's the unfortunate truth about psychological programming.
If I'm quiet, it's just because.
Into the Agora asks.
Sorry?
Mulling over. I figured you were just thinking. That's fine. Because, yeah, what I'm saying is pretty. It's not exactly the kind. Like, it's fair if it takes a second to ruminate on it. But yeah, Into the Agora asks in chat, Could I give the audience a summary of what would be required for states to no longer coordinate? Uh, sure. Basically, the reason that states are able to coordinate in the first place is because it's possible to defend property titles, which, to clarify, is distinct from the concept of property in ethics, because property titles, being the basis for what defines property, is unique to societies where power is being expressed through political organizations, because political organizations maneuver themselves into the position to be able to do so by controlling how everyone around them accesses resources, and socially engineers a fixed cost, which then makes it able to coordinate proprietary organization models by making it so everyone has to go through a common sense of cost in order to obtain resources everywhere. That's basically how the state makes it possible to defend property titles. And the key to maintaining that whole scheme is essentially the ability for proprietary organizations to coordinate information internally. If you disrupt the ability for proprietary organizations to coordinate between levels of management, information signals that they can trust on investing around, then you disrupt the ability for states to even emerge in the first place, because they'll never be able to create an internal profit loss calculation. That's how you undermine states, step by step. That is everything that would be required to, like, the general outline of the plan you would have to develop to get from here to a free society. You'd have to do something that would make it so proprietary organizations can't coordinate information. And that would be very easy to do. All you'd have to do is make it so that common sense of cost can't be socially engineered into being, because that's what makes the money everyone trades around the state and the prices it's exchanged around consistent enough that it's even possible to collect taxes and base an organization model around that internally.
Which is another one of the reasons that I'm so optimistic about uh, the prospect of the future, especially with things like AI. I'm sure you've heard a lot of stuff about. I think we were talking about this on the last stream. The inability for, or people are becoming increasingly skeptical of their ability to rely on news and just stuff that they see online as sources of information, because a lot of things can be just AI generated now. And I know it's a very general statement, but
And that's
it does have some very interesting implications. I think it was like several months ago, shortly after the Wasraeli situation in the Ayaza Strip started, that there was this video that someone posted that showed a car burning in the middle of a street, and then just like 2 seconds into the middle of the video, there's this pill-shaped object that's clearly 3D generated that just pops up in the middle of the scene and passes through the vehicle with the fire and the smoke interacting with it, clearly demonstrating that as realistic as the scene looks, it is still AI generated. Which
the wolf one's pain animation doesn't look like pain.
that's getting it go over here. Yeah, so all I was saying is that I am seeing posts every now and then where people are trying to point out, hey, I can't freaking tell what is real and what isn't anymore. No pun intended. And all I can't help but think is that people aren't going to be able to use the model of quote-unquote truth that has been peddled, particularly through the schooling system, where, like, it's been many years since I've been in government schools, and from what I can tell, it's gotten way worse. Nowadays, it's like, whether or not a research paper is, or how a research paper is graded, is determined almost exclusively by how quote-unquote credible the sources are. Now, that just begs the question.
Yeah, which
What
is the complete.
now that like anyone can make any source about anything ever, what is it that makes any one particular source more credible than others? I am not
And
getting
that's
the point.
exactly the point. It's just becoming increasingly obvious even to fucking kids that are in school right now that the only reason that most of the norms causing problems in their lives exist is because someone has put it there, and the only reason they put it there is purely self-interested on their part at your expense.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the only reason that it exists, practically, is to either do that directly or maintain some system which is.
And I think more and more, particularly young people, are becoming increasingly aware of it. Remember talking about this on the last stream, where it's just like, schools, like teachers in particular, this 25-minute video. I don't think that's the exact length, but not really important. Point is, long ass video, nothing but Instagram and TikTok videos, like few-second videos of teachers in government schools talking about like how they don't know just how to deal with students nowadays because they are, to summarize their claims, belligerent, disrespectful, easily distracted, and don't know how to perform the skills that is expected from students at their age. And I just can't help but hear the descriptions and think to myself, good? Not in the sense that, kids are stupid, because I actually don't believe kids are stupid. In fact, I take the exact opposite position. And I think what's just going on is that the political organizations are finding it increasingly difficult to be able to indoctrinate kids, and that's a good thing. And now all that's going on is that, oh, come on, let me catch that thing. Anyways, what was another one? Nice. Yeah, so all that's really going on is that the state is finding it increasingly difficult to be able to indoctrinate kids, and now they're trying really hard to try to get away from that problem that they themselves have created just by being so non-credible.
Yeah, and the state's solution to people trying to get out of government schooling almost makes my goddamn skin crawl. You're not seeing the practical problems that it's causing yet, but yeah, create the controlled opposition reactionary movement and signal to them that they should be the ones homeschooling their kids, so people looking to homeschool their kids will follow the advice being peddled by hucksters trying to signal to them, and the advice that they signal to their kids is basically just perpetuating abuse at home. If you are get like if you are getting, like, I've seen some of like the social commentary from Daily Wire, do not listen to any of their advice. Every single person, like if you are a parent or you like are trying to look for a way to actually like be independent and a person, don't follow their advice. It's going to turn you into a Manchurian candidate. It's gonna turn you into one that basically just fetishizes the wage system and feels too scared to criticize anybody else, or inflicts a sort of anxiety onto someone else that makes them feel like they're too scared to question anything because they don't want to experience negative repercussions.
I want
That's
to
all that following their quote unquote parenting advice will do.
I want to reply to what you said, but I don't know if you're watching the stream, but I just stumbled upon the corpse of a guy I killed, and there's a wolf right here trying to eat him.
I do see this.
Still I'm getting out of here. I'm next. Oh, chest. Chest, then escape.
Bruh.
I didn't even know that could happen. Okay, okay, okay. Going back to base. Everything we're just gonna pretend that never happened. Everybody's T-posing. This is normal.
No, it's Pal. It's Palworld. Pikacario asked. It says right in the title of the stream, but glad to be here. An average blonde. What are you? I'm just looking at the chat now. It's not a place. What are you talking about? How do you not? How are you looking at the world in a way at this point where you're not just how what we're describing is not like you can't just apply this immediately to situations that you experience on a daily basis and think, "Oh yes, that is really creepy and controlling and I don't like how it tries to operate outside of my perception." Well, more specifically, I don't like how the people who put it there try to design it in such a way where it's almost impossible to perceive it.
That's what makes it particularly insidious.
Unless you start unless you go through experiences or start asking lines of questioning, most people won't because as a result of not having those experiences or not like getting invested in something that makes them not want to ask like scrutinize certain things from certain lines of questioning. There are entire aspects of your perception of nature that operate outside of your ability to even comprehend them, not because of the limits of logic itself, but because of the limits of your perception of logic. Ah, okay.
What's up?
Okay. I was clarifying what you were asking for, average blonde. I wanted to know. That wasn't like a tangent directed at you. That's more just me expressing my thoughts about certain things.
Okay. I mean, I know it's not directed at you, but still.
You said on it. Somebody asked where you are to this. Somebody asked where you live, and you said on the edge. That's fucking amazing.
I mean, is it wrong?
Oh,
Not
that's
about
great.
me because I never said I never said that I live on the edge.
No, I live in the same place. We're headmates.
Let's see here. I know for a fact that I live in the heads of several Hoppians. Just for the simple fact that I question.
There's apparently people bitching about.
Sorry. Hello?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You kind of cut out.
Can I be heard on stream?
Well, I mean,
Sorry.
I can hear you on my end, so I assume so. The stream is being.
And now I lost my train of thought. God damn it.
Well, anyways, I was going to ask you before. What's the?
Well, you couldn't.
What?
Yeah, there might be a delay between us because I didn't interrupt you, at least on my end.
Yeah, that's probably what that is. But anyways, all I was going to ask was...
Yeah, there's like a 2 or 3 second delay.
All I was going to ask was what the advice that the Daily Caller is giving, because I'm actually not familiar with what their homeschooling advice is going to be. I mean, this is the Matt Walsh website. I know Matt Walsh doesn't own it, but he's particularly prominent on it. And the guys... I have no proof of this at all, so feel free to discount what I have to say, but I'm reasonably sure the guy's a pedophile. I am 90% sure that...
Matt Walsh? Oh, that was... Yeah, that was specifically who I was referring to, that I was thinking of. Like, there's other examples, but yeah, like I've seen some of the stuff that gets posted on the Daily Wire because fucking I'm around boomers again, so I get more of a frame of reference of what the boomer media sphere is like. And yeah, like the fucking he mostly his content is mostly centered around disturbingly enough advice for how you should look at your own family and family dynamics. And yeah, unsurprisingly, like I just described it, that's essentially what you get. um how to abuse your kid and convince yourself that if they're not going along with it, that's just because they're a libtard snowflake. And yeah, like if you're like, regardless of what you think of any of his takes on any other subject, I'm telling you, like, there is a fucking there is a time bomb with the skeletons in his closet that you're not going to want to be within 50 feet of when that door swings open. That's all that I will say as far as what I think about like what's probably going on in his private life, just based on yeah some of the takes of his we've seen floating around, coupled with what he apparently specializes in with the Daily Wire.
Yeah, for those of you who aren't
Like
aware,
if he's not going to get like if he's not gonna get outed as a pedo, then yeah, he's gonna like it's gonna come out that he abused his kids when one of them gets old enough to start using social media, or he's gonna turn out to be like a narcissist or something in private. There's something up with him, and like you guys should probably be weary of being associated. But anyway, what were you gonna say?
yeah, I was just going to say, like, for those of you who aren't aware of of the takes that Matt Walsh in particular has been peddling in, he is like he is like hugely pro child arranged marriages, and outright said that like he idolizes Singapore as a model for like social, like not I don't think it's social relations. I'm trying to figure out what the best word for it is. But it's like for how police conduct ought to be, or ought to go, where there's like zero tolerance on everything, where the police come after you with equal severity if you murder somebody, or if you just throw a scrap of paper into the trash can and it just falls off the rim. That's littering. That's evil, bad, wrong, evil. And I don't know if that's like what Matt Walsh actually advocates for, but in general, his takes on these issues are at best quite yikesy, and at worst, uh, even more yikesy. There's nothing good, and as stated, you're
It,
you're much better off
like
just being able to like maintain your distance in the highly likely event that things start to go poorly with him, as they no doubt will, because freaking like arranged child marriages. That is only, to be fair, that's only the second worst take I've heard in my entire life from
yeah.
somebody, but that's still like, number two. Considering number one is literally is like overtly pro genocide. I don't even say like pro genocide as in like genocide is the logical conclusion of the policy he advocates for. I mean, like, actually just out and out, I support genocide.
Yeah, and on top of that, I've heard like if someone is reactionary, so they see themselves as being pathologically obligated to defend Matt Walsh from criticism. Basically, his response to people beginning to point that out, that he like straight up defends arranged child marriages and thinks of like straight up has essentially made intellectual arguments trying to justify why children should be treated as property by their parents. like extending to the point of that's how like their agency should be seen. Yeah, his response to that was to just gaslight people and try to claim that it never happened, or that when it did happen, it was him joking on a shock jock radio show, even though there are fucking clips of him making these exact arguments on the Daily Wire. So that's what I mean. Straight up just bald faced lying and trying to gaslight people was the response. So that doesn't really paint a good picture. And on top of that, if you actually like think just critically look at the way like pull up any clip of Matt Walsh talking about like social life and listen to the way that he describes looking at other people. That's one of the main things that puts me off about him. It's like the way that he described like he associates concepts with people. It like reveals how quite a bit about how he thinks of power, and he is the kind of person who should not have power over anything other than his own life.
Okay.
That's all that I'll say about that.
Suffice to say, he at least gives me the impression that he has enough skeletons in his closet to fill a Holocaust museum. Again, I don't know for certain that he's a pedophile. All I'm saying is that I'm not ruling it out. I mean, it's kind of weird how we went from Palworld all the way to Matt Walsh. Well, Matt Walsh may or may not be a pedophile over the course of like 45 minutes. Wow, have we really been on for that long?
That's because well, I didn't go into this with a coherent narrative for the stream other than just talking about why we love Palworld, which yeah is because I love like having having only played it primarily just to test how it runs on my computer. The reason that in the description we call it the Boykisser of Games is because I love it for the same reason that I love the Boykisser meme, which is it by its existence practically makes it so you have to self-direct and you have to think about you have to actually scrutinize your own reasoning around your own preferences just because of the implications of Palworld being released and the way that the state tried to treat it in the way that it has social media sites prioritize content in their algorithms and what narratives they promote.
What's going on is that
Because yeah, I don't know necessarily. I don't think necessarily it was the state rubbing their hands together like, "Ooh, Pal World is a threat." No, but it like I think it's probably not even the state being the prime mover, but the reason I even mention them is because this is only possible because of the infrastructure they defend through maintaining the ability to defend IP. But yeah, that's basically just what happened. All of the social media sites, there's interests that don't like Pal World's existence. Everybody tried to weaponize reasons against them, try to come up with reasons against them and weaponize their own emotions against them. And then it just reveals that all of the things people thought that they had an investment in turns out it's only the Twitter artists at this point. Literally everybody else is just telling them to shut up and wants the state to fuck off. Or well, from their perspective, that's not how most people rationalize it. It's the main but the main skepticism seems to be directed towards proprietary organizations, but that's exactly the point. Like I mentioned earlier, the functional implications of subverting proprietary organizations undermines the ability of the state to defend property titles. So depends on how far you want to go, but if you really want these assholes to not have control over your lives anymore, um, well, we've identified what to do about it. And yeah, I like halfway in that statement completely lost my train of thought if you can't tell.
that's fine.
But it's all right. It's all right. We're having a good time. We didn't have a coherent narrative to start the stream with. I thought that honestly seems like a really good format for streams because of how well the last one went, and just that I'm a lot more confident about my ability to give commentary now, just because of the fact that I can demonstrate I understand a lot of these topics at this point well enough that I don't have doubts, and that's because I don't see myself as a proponent of ideology anymore.
Well, for me, it's just identifying that. Oh damn! It did a lot of damage. For me, it's just that I understand that attempting to go in with a coherent
Oh,
narrative is not necessarily something that's doomed to fail, but eventually, just due to people having different ideas, understandings, I and takes on certain subjects, that it will eventually cause the narrative to shift in some way. And so I think the best way to interact with the chaos of an actual conversation is to embrace it. Just go in, don't even bother like trying to have a coherent narrative from the very beginning, and you can't really go wrong. All right, this is going to be close here. Oh crap, that's fine.
all right. But I remember where I was going originally with that train of thought. I compare it to Boykisser. I call it the Boykisser of Games because it kind of disrupts the state's propaganda model around media in the same way that Boykisser disrupts the state's propaganda model through psychological manipulation through memes. Which, by the way, I don't know if you how many of you realized that was happening, but the Virgin Chad template, actually most templates, meme templates, which are designed to create an archetype and then project characteristics onto it. Every single one of those, without exception, is part of a propaganda model that's manipulating your perception of your own emotions. So be wary of that. It's making you subconsciously associate those things with a avatar that you're assigning a value judgment to.
I think
And
a lot of
the
people have
primary reason that I love Boy Kisser, and the primary reason I was just gonna say, and the primary reason that I love Boy Kisser so much is because it's the only meme that people actually spread around, which does the exact opposite. It actually makes you think about why you direct your interests the way you do, and about your own sense of identity, no less. So, just like Boy Kisser was one of the best things to ever happen to psychology through social media, um, Palworld's one of the best things to happen to the way that it changed how people are starting to see IP.
and it just does that just through sheer implication. A whole bunch of people trying to figure out,
At least,
hey, what's going on? Why is this happening? Why are all of these people? And this isn't me actually asking questions. This is just me channeling the thoughts of other people who might be experiencing this. Why are all of these people angry about this silly game that's basically Pokemon with guns? Don't think there's any. I mean, there's no good answer.
I mean, honestly, from my perspective, it just looks like a really fun game, and it sucks that I had to spend most of the stream transferring the files. But yeah, I think that I'm just happy to see more people starting to. It looks like increasingly coming to sort of the same realization that I had, but from their own perspectives, because it's just getting unbearable to continue living with the stress that these proprietary organization models and the state are creating, and it's getting to the point where more people are realizing that doesn't need to exist. They're getting to the point where it's just becoming so unbearable that they're beginning to question it just because of the stress it's creating, and then realizing that it doesn't need to exist when actually reflecting on it. with genuine like genuine inquiry. Like I don't think people are consciously lying to themselves, just reflecting on my own experience, trying to deal with those sorts of topics. It's like I understand it. I'm not accusing anybody of like being a liar or not wanting or anything like that. I just mean like reflecting on anybody here who hasn't figured out like you I could tell you right now how to identify something that you haven't figured out about the rules of your own emotions. It's when reflecting on your emotional reasoning. Basically, when you apply it towards any concept, if doing so prevents you from being able to actually think about the concept, then it means that there's an emotional bias associated with it. That happens to everybody all the time, and and you constantly need to look out for it.
That's going to require getting into a lot of.
Sorry that. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's going to require
There's
getting
an
into
echo. I
a
mean, there's a
rather
delay.
complex topic regarding people's emotions and how one can start to achieve mastery over their own self and liberate themselves from their own emotional reasoning. Which I mean, we can definitely do. It's just that
Not exactly.
it requires a lot of. What will be the best term here? It requires a lot of context
Basically,
for
the
people to be introduced to.
yeah, which you do not need you don't need any new age woo. Basically, you just need to understand the way that the brain functions, and you need to approach the function of your own brain the way instead of treating your thoughts as literal statements, approach the way you're forming thoughts, the way that a programmer writes code in software. That's a very general way of explaining how it works, or at least how you're going to begin figuring out your own emotions. Like you're using your own thoughts as functions just to get your brain to do something that by implication of doing that will allow you to study something you couldn't otherwise.
Mm-hmm. The follow-up question then is, how do you know, or how do you do that, and how does one know when they've achieved that?
And that's where you have to do studying because I learned how to do that through a mix of research that I was pointed to through documents that I found reading anything related to MK Ultra on the CIA.gov website, and and basically understanding natural magics and the way they were originally framed, as Ilul described it in the Technological Society. That's the context that I used mainly to come to that conclusion that I referred to at least.
Sorry if I'm quiet at the moment. Just
It's a lot to it. It's a lot to explain. I'm sorry. I was just going to say it's a lot to explain, and sorry if we can't in one conversation, but it's based on what we have based on what we have explained, like it's something that we're going to end up writing extensively about regardless. So if there's not content out right now, don't worry. That's just because we're just coming back to YouTube. But yes, we can prove literally everything that we're saying. I can do so in a way where like regardless of whether or not my perspective exists, I could prove that someone would be able to reproduce everything that I'm claiming. So I know that what I'm claiming as a basis and what any reasonable person could consider science. As in, there's a methodology that can be scrutinized. There's an epistemological foundation that the methodology is implied by. The epistemological foundation can be validated, and I can explain exactly why. I can demonstrate exactly why.
Problem is that trying. Problem is that it's going to require a very significant grounding in metaphysics and epistemology to be able to explain all this to everybody. And while we have been doing a lot to try to explain metaphysics and epistemology in Backalley Discord, for a lot of people, unfortunately, they're either not always being able to be present in every conversation, so that there are some important details that they're not always going to be gathering, or there is something else going on. Not anybody's fault. It's just that it would be a helpful. I'm just agreeing that it would be a helpful resource to be able to have these resources on hand that people can just refer to. It's like, oh, what do you mean by metaphysics? Well, take a look at this. And to a certain extent, we do have that, because when we refer to technique, it's very easy just to refer to the Technological Society by Jacques Ellul, but we can't always do that with everything because we're not always referring to technique, sadly.
Yeah, and the sense in which the practical effects of technique could even meaningfully be described requires us to refer to a specific thing we're observing in the environment. Because technique, how it is expressed is directly dependent on on basically the knowledge and a perception of people in a specific environment relative to the practical effects of the environment on their behavior and their own reasoning. It's basically something that like requires like a praxeological analysis and a proper understanding of that before you could even meaningfully describe. Like you need to approach understanding from that methodology. So not you can't model technique, in other words. You can't create an axiom that would represent it.
Well, it won't stop them from trying. That's a terrible idea. I would recommend against doing that, though.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said that won't stop them from trying, though that's a terrible idea. I strongly recommend against people doing this.
Ah.
Yes.
Yeah, because you're only gonna if you're because if you're acting in good faith, I'll tell you right now, if you're going to try to represent technique using axioms, what's going to end up happening is you'll end up creating objectivism, but for economic models.
Isn't that just objectivism, though?
Well, it's objectivism specialized to economic models. So, just the philosophy of objectivism, except instead of Ayn Rand's opinion, it's what economic model by your opinion, you should consider to be the best.
Well, that makes it better, I promise. That's just how it works. Anyway, by the way, how close are you to getting the update for Palworld?
Let's see. It's like 75% done.
Damn, it's been going
Because
for a while
my
now.
fucking West Virginia, because my fucking Appalachian mountain internet ass is probably having a hard time running the stream and Steam at the same time.
Well, the good news is that the stream is being streamed through my end, so really all you have to do is just keep YouTube on. Speaking of which, what are people saying in the comments right now?
Quite a bit, but just studying pracs will help you understand technique or just societies in general, well, the world in general, from Into the Agora. I mean, I guess just leave more comments and we'll address one specifically, or if there's one you really wanted us to address, just like point it out.
I mean, I'm playing the game right now, so you're gonna have to look at the comments and tell me if there's anything particularly, or if anyone has anything they'd like for us to talk about. Because I know that before the stream started, someone in our server was actually asking about the David Friedman debate. That was it. You remember that from was it 4 years ago? I mean, it wasn't really a debate, but
Yeah,
it was treated like a debate.
stream that wasn't actually the stream that wasn't actually a debate, but was a Q&A, but was reframed as a debate because someone's mad and butthurt and for some fucking reason doesn't like me. I actually could get more into it, but I'm not really going to even dignify them by talking about them on stream, so we'll brush past that. Anyway, what were you going to say about it, Heretic?
Well, I mean, they wanted to know what my thoughts were on David Friedman because I was part of that Q and A as well. And granted, I wasn't a part of anything that could even be generously considered to be a debate. I was just a witness. But in general, it's like I've never really had a high opinion of David Friedman's take on libertarianism or politics, just for the simple fact that I mean, my take on David Friedman's like the same criticism that I'm going to be giving for any kind of consequentialist philosophy. It's just like it ultimately appeals to a value judgment. It's his takes on it are no more or
I'm
less
immediately
valid.
going to
Yeah, his takes on any of these topics, to me, are going to be no more or less valid than one's opinion on ice cream flavors. Unless it's chocolate. Unless it's not like the
yeah,
chocolate ice cream, in which case you're objectively wrong.
if anyone legitimate like consequentialism of or just a philosophy that tries to argue both that ethical claims are subjective and simultaneously that there's a normative foundation for moral behavior, I'm basically going to immediately, it's one of those philosophies I'm immediately going to just treat like determinism and disregard and immediately reductio ad who tries to defend it. Because, by the way, consequential is one of the easiest reductio ad absurdums of any moral philosophy. Children, basically the implications of the philosophy in relation to them in literally any social dynamic has absolutely terrifying implications.
Could you go over some of those implications?
So there was what happens if you think that doing something to them is a quote unquote good consequence? What happens if you can find a perspective where you can claim that it is? Because here's the thing, that isn't whether or not that a good consequence is the case, whether or not something is good is entirely dependent on the perceived morality of the person in question. Just referring to consequentialism as a way of informing your own internal morality is basically just an extended way of saying I'm going to treat people however I want and whatever happens happens.
I mean, there's just a simple way of being able to
So,
explain the problems of.
child molester decides they're a consequentialist.
Yep, that's that's
All
actually
right.
exactly where I was going to go with that. all by appealing
Yeah.
by any kind
Child
of take.
molester decides they're a consequentialist.
You see, I perceive that this is a positive outcome because I value my own personal pleasure over the well-being of kids. So therefore, it's morally justified for me to take the actions that I do because all I have to do to justify literally anything is just say that it's a good consequence, and there's no way for me to be able to prove it wrong since it's appealing entirely to a value judgment. But we can actually go slightly deeper than that because I can point out that, hey, uh, how do you know whether or not someone is lying when they say that, when they are expressing their values? You can certainly try to, like, read them, put them through lie detector tests, but there's no real way of being able to actually truthfully distinguish someone trying to make a genuine claim about their own personal preferences versus them just trying to get a personal get out of jail free card. And it's really not, in my
And
opinion, I don't
that's
think it's really
yeah, that's
worthwhile
the
to regard it
reason
as
why
a
that's
serious claim.
and as far as my thoughts on David Friedman's version of anarchy, well, the problem that I just pointed out is essentially is the reason why his version of quote unquote anarchy is basically just modernity, except uh the government asks before they quote unquote tax you. Same social dynamics present in everything. It's just that there's another question that's asked as like a formality before they kill you if you refuse.
Mm-hmm. It's just political rule, but with extra
There's literally
steps.
an essay. There's an essay in The Machinery of Freedom, which is him trying to defend how you respond to crime in a free society, in an anarchist society is how it's framed. Which literally every part of how that's framed demonstrates a lack of understanding of societies from how a libertarian would see societies. But um, yeah, his solution within the context of the essay for how a free society deals with quote unquote deals with criminals. You're gonna love it. You remember what it is, or do I need to tell everyone what it is?
I actually am
It's
having trouble recalling
basically
off the top of my
just
head.
turn the hotel. It's basically just create hotels where people that are staying there, like the armed bodyguards, prevent them from leaving until they pay a fee to the insurance company. It's literally fucking jail. They're just not calling it jail. Like it's like David Friedman's version of quote unquote anarcho capitalism is the most transparent version of the philosophy, which kind of reveals the point that we made, which is it just reframes liberalism in a way that makes you think it's anarchism.
They really don't. They really have trouble seeing libertarianism as being having any kind of distinguishing traits from modernity. It's just they think that the extra steps really amount to anything. They're just making they're just recreating the state just slightly more complicated. So it's no wonder that those are the mainstream ones. Those are the ones that get promoted because those are the ones that really don't do anything to challenge the political ruling class and the ruling orthodoxy. They act and actively prevent people from being able
I
to
mean,
analyze the state as an organizational model.
yeah, they don't even even internally to the ANCAP movement as ANCAPs frame it, there isn't even a clear idea of what the state is. And if your movement definitively is aimed at trying to find a way to stop it from existing, well, you're kind of shit out of luck if one of the premises of your movement prevents you from studying the thing you're trying to approach in a way that would actually allow you to figure that out. Because if you can't figure out how, if you can't figure out your the interests of your enemy, you can't organize against them.
I mean, I think it's been kind of. I think it's
And
like.
that's exactly the point. The ANCAP. Sorry.
All I was going to say is that it's it's like really well known that you can't beat your enemy without knowing them. And if you're being actively prevented from studying them, then you can't determine how they work, why they work, their strengths and weaknesses, all sorts of stuff. It make it even worse, like you give them the ability to construct a narrative about themselves.
Yeah, so regardless of how you see promoting political ideology and the subtext of political ideologies, if you're being intellectually, if you are actually scrutinizing the way that it frames society's relationship to the state, if you legitimately care about the condition of freedom that is implied by libertarianism, and that is legitimately what you are trying to accomplish as the result of your means, then that's not what you will not be endorsing political ideology. And I don't mean that like, I don't mean that like it's an option, but dogmatically you just have to reject it. I mean, if you frame it that way, you can't understand what would be required to get you to that conclusion. You can't coordinate you can't think in a way where the conclusion you'll come to as far as what means you should use will actually meaningfully undermine the state's ability to coordinate, because as far as liberals are concerned, the state is just power and nothing else. It's just the concept of power personified. No, and Swedish ANCAP, nobody cares. Nobody is upset if you are still identifying with the ANCAP movement. We're not talking about a specific person. We're talking about a sort of trend in philosophy and how certain topics are framed. If that doesn't apply to you again, then I'm not talking about you. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, like nothing. You don't need to identify with a label. Like you personally, and although I am saying you personally, I'm actually not referring to anyone in particular, but just people in general. Uh, you are more than the labels that are applied to you. And it takes a bit to
Yeah,
like really understand what the
and that's
implications of
what.
that are. But it's like if you're an ANCAP, or rather, if you identify as an ANCAP, and you find that there's someone else who identifies as an ANCAP who has a take on politics that you vehemently disagree with, that doesn't undermine you. That isn't a slight against you personally. That just means that they personally have a bad take. You can say that, oh, they aren't actually a true ANCAP because of X, Y, and Z, and you might be right. I don't know, but it's a possibility. But you can disagree. You can have all sorts of differing takes, opinions, and uh, understandings of concepts with other people. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Smash God T Smash God TV asks, if we're moving past ideology and labels, then why are we still holding on to defending libertarianism? Well, because libertarianism is framed as an ideological movement, but if you actually study the nature of society's relationship to the state, functionally, the way that libertarianism, as a characterizes society's relationship to the state, it is essentially correct. You can prove it through basically applying the praxeological method to sociological concepts like power, for example, or technique. And specifically how this validates libertarianism is that it validates the claim of libertarians about how the state controls society, and it validates the way that they describe functionally what the state is, and on top of that, if you follow the implications of well, taking a step back, if you follow the implications of their claims, specifically about concepts in the study of ethics, and you take the context of the praxeological method, just how that approaches the study of societies, what you find when you apply those two schools of thought together is that you get a new theory of sociology. So the fact that you actually get a new theory of sociology implied when you apply um, how what the way libertarianism frames the state implies about the nature of society, I still consider it something that's worth, it's not something that necessarily is tied to the ideological movement, because whether or not the ideological movement exists, you would be able to prove what it's claiming. So I consider it to be a methodology for that reason and not an ideology.
And again, the labels really aren't important.
And I
Like, it's not a criticism of you or anything that you're saying. I'm just trying to point out
Yeah.
that people don't need to attach themselves to a particular label or feel the need to. I mean, you can if you want, but attachment to the label is how people become tribalistic. That you have to work to defend the libertarian
Yeah,
team.
yeah, remember what I mentioned earlier about how the Virgin Chad meme or any meme that tries to create an archetype is subtly brainwashing you by making you associate value judgments with the concepts ascribed to the character that the value judgment is associated with. Labels are doing the exact same thing functionally to your brain, so don't create them for yourself.
You can you can do better. Not you specifically, but people in our audience. You don't need to be. You don't have to attach yourself to a label. You are more than that. Trust me.
And that quite simply is what a lot of people started realizing seemingly within the last month or two more than anything is it's just gotten to the point where people finally started questioning the standards they were trying to adjust themselves around because it just got too unbearable.
I'm seeing more and more of that. It might be. I'm willing to admit that it might be confirmation bias on my part, though I do see that a lot of people are genuinely questioning norms that exist in modernity and are actually wondering if there's other better ways. I'm seeing videos every other day about. You remember how before I talked about the teachers who are saying they don't know how to teach Gen Z students because of just how different they are. Same
Yeah.
Same thing's actually happening in the white market where employers are actually really having trouble getting younger workers not only interested in working but motivated to continue to do it because they just have different they just inform their values in ways that are completely different than how generations before did, and that's what happens when you give people a point of reference through the internet for how it is that people could interact, how people could inform their actions and judgments outside of what's already expected, and then they suddenly, oh no, they reach a completely different conclusion. Who could have seen that coming?
People have a competing frame of reference. They don't, and the only frame of reference they have is being somebody fucking bludgeoning them with a stick. Wow, they choose the option where they're not being bludgeoned by a stick. Amazing. Who would have seen that one coming?
Well, I can't imagine there's very many people who would choose getting beaten with a stick. Oh, what do I know?
Well, just like if that were the actual dilemma, there appears to still be people that are going down with the sinking ship, at least in the state. So, but then again, what else are they gonna do?
Oh, I mean, we kind of said it already. It's their only point of reference for how to get resources and how to achieve personal interaction. I mean, it's even more interesting when you recall shenanigans like related to uh, how people who become emotionally invested in one particular means of gaining resources suddenly having that be the least efficient method for doing what they were previously doing in the past. Well, you can imagine that they become a little annoyed by that. Hence, baby boomers.
And I pinned that message by JC because yes, that is exactly the sort of meme I'm referring to.
What
Where
meme?
the purpose of it is to create an archetype and describe and the purpose of it is to create archetypes and ascribe value judgments to them. I depict thing I like as Chad and thing I don't like as Soy Jack, therefore thing I like is better. Yeah, there are a lot of memes where the point of them is essentially that, and every single one of them is trying to brainwash you.
I've been meaning to actually make a remark about that, but it keeps slipping my mind for some reason. Not necessarily that you're. I'm not even gonna. I'm not gonna claim you're wrong because you're not, but just that the original version versus Chad meme was attempting to depict both sides as retarded. Clearly, that didn't happen, or at the very least, it didn't take, unfortunately. But I just can't help but find
Yeah,
I
I'm
can't help
not
but find that dynamic interesting.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it started as a psyop, but somewhere along the way, at the very least, the government was involved, 100%. And if you've actually read through the sort of studies that were conducted that are documented relating to MK Ultra, you'll especially like this just has their fucking fingerprints all over it.
There, like people joke about about like there's pictures all over the place of the military attempting to study memes, and I know that.
No, they figured it out in the 70s.
I know, I know. I'm just saying. I'm just bringing this up to point out that people joke about it, that they're trying to figure out memes, but it's just like they figured it out a long time ago, and it's in the state's interest to give people the impression that they're still trying to figure it out because they can't understand it, when in fact they wrote the book on it, in many cases quite literally.
Yeah, and my understanding of the brain became more sophisticated after reading it. So I know that what they're like, I know what they're describing is valid. And that's mostly what they discovered is associative programming methods through media archetypes and representation. That's primarily what they were experimenting with. It's what most of the actually um the ones you're able to find were, and that's exactly Like that's the main thing that I was able to see came specifically from MK Ultra. But they even referred to like the techniques of the natural magics in their study. Like that's what they based some of their research on. So further validation, further validation of what I was mentioning earlier. But
I mean, the state. See, the states has
I
basically.
don't really have anywhere to go with that.
Yeah, I'm just going to remark that the state basically wrote one of the most comprehensive and sophisticated pieces of literature on human thinking and human thoughts ever produced. So it's worth keeping in mind that, yeah,
Just what's publicly.
don't underestimate these guys. You will get
Yeah,
Sun Tzu. Always appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak. They want to look incompetent with these like
here's
images
an
of these like
interesting.
70-year-old army generals attempting to figure out how soy jacks work. And I can promise you that that general is being advised by people who not only know how soy jacks work, but could tell you down who could give you a pretty good idea of exactly how many thousands of people in this country would have this exact response to this meme being formatted in this specific way. They are sophisticated.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that doesn't mean that they have an advantage necessarily or that it's like impossible to understand because it's really not. Just takes, some reflection really and studying, to have context to reflect upon. Um, but yeah, anybody who is, I'll put it like this: why is it that you think, if you do think this, that intelligence agencies are full of a bunch of boomers that don't know how to use social media? Where did you hear that?
Social media, which is
Where did you, yeah, where did you get that impression? And who games the narrative of the content that's promoted on social media sites?
it's going to be the same people who
Well,
cause a lot of those
not the
organizations to
state.
begin with. I mean, like,
Yeah, not the state every time necessarily, but the state absolutely has the ability to.
I mean, which I mean, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, which one of these like major uh, media companies that exist today weren't funded by the CIA, either through COINTELPRO or something else? Because I'm having trouble thinking of one.
You don't even need to point to any active intelligence agents operating within media companies. All you need to do is point out the fact that their literal ability to function as organization models is dependent on the state defending property titles. That's all that you need to point out, and that is just technically a true statement. Like if it was not for IP, it would not be possible to operate as a media production company in the white market or a proprietary social media site if it wasn't for the state defending all of the claims that's required to make it so no one can decentralize the internet at the time being. Well, not that no one can, just make it impossibly difficult. Almost impossibly difficult.
It's possible, just very, very difficult, and requires a lot of infrastructure, unfortunately.
But that's basically just it. Like, You know the I hate that I have to cite him probably for the most common example of this this model of dialectical thinking, but really they essentially just take the Noam Chomsky approach of follow the money, but from a praxeological perspective, and you'll have a pretty easy time identifying the way the state manipulates you through social engineering and through the enforcement of property titles. And you'll see very quickly how everything just comes back to these like it even being possible to maintain a lot of the problems that define everyone's lives just because of property titles being defended by the state, that being the only reason that there's still problems or that no one can address them.
I'm sorry, you're gonna have to repeat that one more time for me.
I'm sorry, but I lost it. I
We'll play.
yeah,
We're on the stream, so we can
it's
just play it back eventually.
these stream of consciousness rants are really good at getting my thoughts out in a surprisingly sophisticated manner in casual conversation, but they're not so good at memorizing what's happening or focusing on anything other than my thought process at that moment.
Yeah.
Kind of hard to do that when kind of hard to not do that when I think about things now. I guess that's the only downside of meditating.
I mean, would you really call it a downside?
You gotta. It's not a downside. It's more like you gotta like you have a sense of intuition around your how your brain is processing your sensory environment. You have to navigate around. It's functional, it's different. Anyway, talking about, let's go ahead and look at chat. Oh yeah, the it's really amusing how it's almost like there's all of the enthusiasm around Xavier Malay because this was mentioned in the chat. How it's so obvious that it's either astroturfed, 100% astroturfed, or it's just people who are complete philosophical zombies who promote the "we're so back" shit. Which I don't know if you've seen that, but that's essentially the name of this sort of push that the Mises Institute's been trying to game through social media of like trying to get ANCAPs explicitly invested in political ideology because it's close to an election year, and it absolutely you know that you're dealing with an independent grassroots organization when it acts the exact same way as any other political party. But yeah, digressing. I just love how you could tell that nobody genuinely has anything positive to say about Molay, and the attempts to excuse away how he's obviously a CIA asset are laughable. Someone said exactly what I was thinking in chat.
What's the what are they trying to say?
Pick up the
Like I'm
the glorious pick up the fought.
I haven't been following. Like I remember I was on Civil Offense's stream regarding what's his name, and I couldn't even be bothered to remember his name, so I'm just going to refer to him as what's his name from now on.
Yeah, hi, I got home from work.
Because of just how unimportant he is.
I can't hear you guys, so I'm just...
This is what he's on.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry.
Yeah, Doug showed up in the background here. That's Douglas Terabyte from the server. Everybody just got home from work. But anyway, Heretic was talking, so continue.
Yeah, just talking about Blobbity Blom away over in Argentina, aka Nazi Mexico. And his thing is like, oh my goodness, I am such a friend of liberty because I dress as like an ANCAP superhero from what's his name? Chris Chan's comic book.
Eric July's.
I said Chris Chan!
I know. Oh, good fucking freaking what is the vol? Is that actually what his comic book is called? The Voluntarist, or am I like? It really is giving off like Lightbringer vibes.
It actually, and yes, it actually does.
It really does.
It does give off that vibe because it does. It's unfortunate
Because it's so obvious. The reason why is because it's so obviously like the point of making it exactly like Lightbringer is so obviously it has nothing to do with the story and is purely just serving an interest of the author that's unrelated. Except it's just way cringier in Linkara's case.
To be fair,
But honestly,
to be fair,
the
I'm not familiar
Voluntarist
with,
or whatever it's called is.
To be fair, I'm not familiar with Lightbringer at all, so you'll forgive me if I don't express that much familiarity with it. Which honestly is probably for the best, but still, I just
It's basically it's so.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, there's a fucking delay again, but as far as what Lightbringer is, imagine Sonichu if it was written by someone who has the awareness of how other people think of a 14-year-old instead of just not having any awareness.
So, it's written by someone with the awareness of a 14-year-old as opposed to someone with zero awareness, which is the Sonichu comic.
In Chris Chan's case, yeah.
That's slightly an improvement, I guess. I mean, I think in the case of the Voluntarist, it's just...
And that's not the Eric July's comic, because that's apparently, not the name of his comic. That's the name of somebody else's, Jack Lloyd. But but considering the title of it, and that, by the way, is the person who is either married or dating the philosopher. But yeah, it's probably like I could tell just by looking at it, it has the same problem, which is that the purpose of it isn't to tell a story. The purpose of it is to moral fag about the non-aggression principle.
In other words, it's indistinguishable from political propaganda. The difference is that it tries to frame itself as anti-political, while at the same time being unable to distinguish itself from
basically.
propaganda in form.
So it's not gonna come off as like cringy in an angsty way as like Sonichu or the Lightbringer will. It's gonna come off as cringy in the same way as those like Christian alternative products in the 80s and 90s do, where like they all are terrible because the people who are making them for the purpose of making a point that's not related to the purpose of making the media. Yeah, it's the reason why all of them, except a couple of segments from like literally all media of that variety, except for like a couple of segments from VeggieTales, turned out terrible. Which segments from VeggieTales am I referring to? The ones that you've seen as memes floating around, basically.
That's a very it's a very interesting honor the to have the quality of your content be judged solely on its meme worthiness.
Yeah, and I know that other people agree with me, so I'm not gonna let people front and say, "Oh, Esso complimented VeggieTales." If other people didn't think that those memes were good, then they wouldn't be fucking memes. Well, they wouldn't spread organically like they do. They spread on Discord, which means at the very least people liked them enough to share them again.
And they were quite prominent.
I'm apparently louder than you.
Oh.
Stream.
Oh, it's probably because I'm leaning back and I'm away from my microphone.
Yeah.
Let's bring that closer. There we go.
Yeah, you sound fine to me, but I've had to have the volume down on the stream throughout, so I don't really have a good idea of how you're sounding.
I should sound fine, or I should sound better now.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm not saying by good, quote unquote, I don't necessarily mean it has to be well produced or well written, just like it could unintentionally amusing from one particular perspective can be the reason that something is great. I consider that a valid standard because, well, the standard is it is not why people are sharing it around. It's just whether or not people are because they enjoy it.
Even if it is just pure irony.
Goddamn right, we're back in town.
Who's saying
Glad to see you in chat, Derek Johnson. Just somebody in chat said we're back in town, and yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, what were you saying? This delay is terrible.
It is. I don't know what to do about it. So, actually, one thing I did want to bring up is more World War III shenanigans. Pretty sure you heard about drone strike in a U.S. military base. I think it was in Iraq. Killed like 3 U.S. troopers and injured like a couple more.
Yeah, I heard about that. Is that the one that happened in Pakistan or was launched by Pakistan? I mean, the Pakistani government.
I thought it was there's a whole bunch of them that's been happening in just the last week. It's really hard to keep track of them all.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the problem. I guess that's kind of what we're getting at, is that there have been a bunch that happened in the last week, like in really quick succession to one another. Looks like shit's getting spicy over there.
Yeah, and that's what makes it like really hard to keep track of. Things are like starting to pick. Things are clearly like starting to heat up, and it's genuinely hard to keep track of it all. But one thing I brought this up today. Not today, but I brought this up specifically because there's a lot of hoopla going around, particularly in the mainstreams. Like, even the White House came out and said, like, oh, this is unacceptable. We're going to retaliate hard. And that there's even a lot of speculation that the United States was actually going to be deploying ground forces to somewhere in the Middle East because of this attack specifically. Now, it's unclear who did it. There's a lot of blame being thrown around. Maybe it's just unclear because I haven't done enough digging to figure out who's claimed responsibility. But I mean, I'm gonna be honest. I would not rule out the Israeli government to pulling off false flags, specifically as a way to try to get the United States involved in another forever war.
Yeah, well, I mean, we know that ultimately the reason for we know the reason for the escalations. We talked about it extensively in yesterday's stream, and why if
Yesterday's.
states don't if the political economy. I'm sorry, last week. My bad, I misspoke. Um, but yeah, we talked about it there. How there's essentially just going to be an inevitable conflict between the US and Chinese government caused by them in order for one of them to continue maintaining the debt that their political economy is based around. They're going to have to take supply chains that are being controlled by the other. Which means one of them's going to have to continue. One of them is basically going to have to be destroyed by the other for one to continue existing. So that's the reason why there's going to be, and that's the reason why you're seeing two distinct sides stratifying in geopolitics, and why it's very obvious that the US and Chinese governments are at the center of both, and why both are getting increasingly militaristic. It's the reason why people are even normies are getting concerned about the draft basically.
I remember just right after October 7th, where absolutely nothing happened because everything that we're describing happened exclusively within a fictional universe. But within this fictional universe, there was a tremendous amount of Google searches. How do I avoid the draft? Even if they're not consciously aware of it, there's still at least some aspect of their awareness that leads them to the conclusion that it's possible, and shenanigans could ensue that guarantee that be brought about.
And well, I don't know why I suspect why I think specifically that it's probably not going to be good is just because of that. The fact that the only way for both states to continue existing in this situation is for, for the other one to actually be purged. That's just because we know that it's going to be at least as bad as World War II.
Probably even worse.
Shit. And I'm not saying this to be a doom monger. It's just these are our current prospects. I just explained how there are current prospects. So something to consider, at the very least.
I don't think any honest person would regard either of us as warmongers. I don't want anybody to die. I don't want war even slightly. That is... I don't even know how to put it into words.
No, I just explained why it's going to happen.
Yeah. Unfortunately, what we want and what's actually going to happen are not always in sync. So we just do the best with what we got. And we also hope for the best.
So, I don't know, you come back and noticed a sort of tone shift in our content. Well, yeah, that tends to happen when you realize the full scope of your situation, and you find out that you're you're actually dealing with something that's a mix of the environment trying to game your own emotions against you constantly and states doing this. It's just not it's not good. I don't know what else to say about it. I think my perspective on the state's collapse being an inevitability, I could still my demonstration of that's still valid, and that's still true because of what we pointed out about proprietary organization models. It's just looking to me, it's just looking like between now and then, there's going to be a lot of people dead, and that's something that I don't like thinking about, but it's something that kind of invariably comes up at this point when I reflect on like topics related to geopolitics.
Yep. Unfortunately, we can't ignore it. I mean, it's one thing to, like, we kind of always known that stuff like this was going to happen. Even like 5 years ago, you could probably find clips of me from 2019 talking about how as the states, or as the downfall of the state continues to, like, how it, as it just continues, it's going to become increasingly desperate, and this desperation is going to manifest in increasingly erratic and destructive behavior. That is being demonstrated more and more as time goes on. I mean, I never doubted it for a moment, but to people who did doubt it, their basis for doing so is, well, significantly less defensible than it would have been. And all I
Yeah,
know
and the only thing, and sorry, what were you gonna say?
Yeah. So, like, none of us are like at all enthusiastic about this as a prospect. We just know that as things go on, I mean, it's one thing to know about it abstractly. It's another thing. It's another thing to actively observe it.
And do you want to study, or do you want to study to actually understand the nature of what's happening, or do you just want to be told what you already think you want to hear? I suppose that's the difference, and because of the fact that I am a person in the former camp and not the latter, I can't help but explore those topics. So, what you're gonna get with New Backalley. Sorry if that's not it's not pleasant, but if you're somebody if you're somebody that's here now, you probably understand that you need to hear it.
I
And
think
that's why I'm saying it. It's not. I'm sorry.
oh, it's fine. I'm just going to point out that, unfortunately, it's one of those things where it's like, I'm pretty sure you've seen that cartoon, or that, not a meme, but it's kind of like presented in the political cartoon format, but it's not really a political cartoon, although I suppose it could be framed as such, where it's like you have two booths, unpleasant truths and comforting lies, and the guy at the unpleasant truths booth is looking over with envy at the giant line that formed in front of the comforting lies. And yeah, it's like
Yeah.
nobody wants, or nobody who's sane wants World War III, and nobody who's sane is going to advocate for it. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that World War III isn't going to be happening.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm out of seeing the astroturfed topics that keep getting discussed. I find myself having an increasingly difficult time getting invested. I don't know if that's because I've become more perceptive of the way that it manipulates your narrative of reality, and thus it's even less compelling than it would have been even like a year ago. I don't know if it's just that, or if it is the way or if it's just how increasingly. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. God damn it.
Oh, that's
What
fine.
were we talking about?
I was just bringing up that, yeah, like it's not pleasant to talk about, but I do think that knowing this, even if it's unpleasant at the moment, is going to help people inform their decisions and inform their actions going forward. Because if you're at least considering the bad possibility, then you can at least take measures to prepare yourself mentally for what comes afterwards. But I do distinctly remember hearing about how when United States military special forces go through interrogation training, they always ask the candidates, "Oh, how well do you think you'll be able to resist interrogation?" And the people that go, "Oh yeah, I'll be strong. I'm determined. I've always had this great willpower. I'm going to not tell them anything." Versus the people who are just like, "Yeah, I'm actually not sure." The people who say that they're not sure always end up doing the best in interrogation resistance, because they go through the events, they rehearse the events in their head mentally, predicting what could happen, how they could respond, and in these simulations be able to figure out how it is that they can adjust for that. Whereas the people who think that they are safe, that they already have everything that they need to be able to withstand it, really are unprepared for when the time comes and they have to actually throw stuff down, as it were. I bring that up just to point out
because
that you're gonna
go ahead.
I'm bringing this up just to point out that you're gonna have to mentally prepare for it one way or the other, and it's probably sorry.
I just remember this delay is we got to do something about this next stream, but yeah, I remember when I was going to, and fuck no, I don't. Rip. I'm very sorry for him. Yeah. Rip. All right. I don't even know how to. Sorry for interrupting. I guess. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm having trouble remembering what I was going to say.
Damn it.
Yeah.
I fucked it up. That's whatever.
It's fine, but yeah, I'm kind of actually
I'm
kind of
come
repeating
back
myself.
To us.
I think I actually am kind of repeating myself at this point, where I'm just pointing out that it's gonna happen, whether we know about it or not, whether we want it or not. So at least we can prepare for it, and we have a methodology of approaching how to make the state no longer be a factor in our lives. You just disrupt their ability to communicate. And quite frankly, they're doing that to themselves. Not to say that we have ways of being able to contribute, but...
Well, as soon as they started trying to co-opt large language models, I knew really I was seeing the beginning of the end. Because now they have to incorporate large language models into political technique, and large language models, by their nature, can't be made proprietary, because if you're using one, then you know the weights which trained it, which means you could just make a copy of it. Like trying to make LLMs proprietary is like trying to make songs proprietary at this point.
And they're certainly trying, though it's not at all going to be effective, just because, oh hey, guess what you can't make proprietary? What the hell are you doing?
Yeah, don't try to set any, just responding to what March Scarf said. Yeah, just don't try to set any expectations. Just try to study and get as much context as possible, and then find as many ways that you can use that context as possible as a way of ensuring that you don't have problems as the result of the state fucking with you. That's really it.
Yep, and there's plenty of ways to go about doing this. Remember, the state being unable to coordinate its resources can be as significant as some misinformation that the state has regarding some current geopolitical events, preventing them from being able to make very significant tactical decisions, all the way down to oh hey, the local police department doesn't know anything about traffic in the local area.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just reading. I was just reading the chat for a second. Just responding to Into the Agora. No, I have not heard of Whitney Webb, but I will look into that.
Actually, I think I have. The name sounds familiar. Frick, I'm blanking on it
He
now.
claims that something about her reminds him Into the Agora of James Corbett, as I'm assuming that might be their style of presentation or how they argue. In which case, well, I'm interested, and I'll definitely look into their content. But no, I'm not familiar.
Oh
Sorry.
yeah, yeah. It's back to me now. She does pretty frequently write articles for and produce content for the Last American Vagabond. I don't think she's directly affiliated with them, but she often does associate, and she does podcasts with the guy who runs the website, whose name I don't recall off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I'm tuned out even of so-called alt media. Like the only channels that I was really watching throughout 2022 and 2023 were basically just political propaganda channels, and I was watching their content to study the nature of propaganda models. So I don't even really watch content like The Last American Vagabond at this point. I just study and meditate about it.
Understandable. Yeah, I was just bringing that up to get an example that I think most people would be aware of uh, how my familiarity with Whitney Webb's content. Now, I do watch the Last American Vagabond every now and then, usually when I'm at work, and only thing that really sticks out to me about them in my mind is, although he does pay lip service to libertarianism and libertarian associated claims, his actual Ryan, that's his first name. His actual attempts to understand the state as an organization is unfortunately quite limited. And he'll still pay lip service to things like the deep state narrative, which is something that unfortunately
Yeah,
is crazy.
yeah, I hear that from James Corbett too. It's honestly it like turned me off a little bit, but I can look past it in the context of his documentaries. But yeah, I have like a hard time listening to his commentary because of that. Well, that and his cut I James Corbett, some of the like he's put out some really great work. His documentaries are great, and they're really based and they provide some very useful context, particularly around the Rockefeller family, the Rothschild, the history of central banking, the history of the First and Second World War, 9/11. He has a bunch of great documentaries, but some of the commentary he produces, it's pretty brain dead sometimes.
Yeah.
Like surprisingly so for someone that can make documentaries that great.
I don't know what it is. Granted, I've never really followed James Corbett that much, and the extent to which I did consume his content basically did come through those documentaries, which, as you said, are S tier. Like, genuinely, like some of the most interesting, educational, informative, and entertaining documentaries about any subject I've heard. Like, I've had the misfortune of having to watch a World War II documentary not too long ago. Not from James Corbett. There's like some mainstream normie like Netflix World War II documentary, and the amount of propaganda around it, not only just like them saying things that I knew to be completely untrue, but the extent to which like they just injected commentary into certain events and tried to frame certain people and actors as heroic and others as like evil and dastardly, when I not only know the events being described in significantly more detail than it's being described, and it's a lot more nuanced than what they framed, but also like from a pure propaganda standpoint of how they're using phrases to socially engineer, manipulate people's impressions of what's actually being described. It was an interesting experience to say the least.
Yeah, and I don't know. I can listen to commentary, but I just have a very hard time because like around the subject of political ideology, like listening to it from a political perspective because it's not like like I have a problem with hearing it. It's just I know how it ends within about the first paragraph, like the entire segment, whatever it is, because I understand the rules of the current propaganda model and how the state frames topics to to people who see themselves as part of certain political movements they've defined out as demographics. Just because of that, I know exactly what like if I were to pull up any like obviously politicized commentary within like the first 20 seconds of whatever they're saying, I know how the segment ends. Like the exact narrative the segment's going to create by the time that it ends. And like, if I'm not accurate about point for point what's said, then I'm accurate about the general narrative that's created. Like functionally the informate the what would be taken away by the viewer if they internalized the narrative at face value.
Yep, seems about right.
So yeah, it's not that like I stopped listening to commentary because I just started seeing ideologies for their rules, and it stopped being interesting to listen to. Like just genuinely, I'm not saying this to big myself up or whatever. It's like actually why I have a hard time sitting through it.
After a while, you just start to have heard it all. You just start hearing the same things over and over again. You can start hearing it, and then eventually, you develop a true understanding where you can simulate what they're going to say before they've actually said it, and then when they actually say it, it doesn't even come as like I knew it. It just kind of is just like it starts to become predictable.
Yeah, that's what's happened. That's what happened a long time ago to me. But for every ideological narrative of the state,
Yep, seems about right.
except except maybe Georgists. That's about it. Like they're the only ones that I would have to actually probably study the way they think of political economies to and not and by then by study I basically just mean look at their premise. And even by looking at the premise of the movement, I have not studied any Georgist literature, but I guarantee you that it is basically just Lockean liberalism, with the exception of yeah, but you can't own land. That is George. I have not actually read Henry George, but I'm right and I know it because of the way that they treat property and because of the way that they treat the concept of freedom and the way they treat economic incentives.
I'm not terribly familiar with Georgism myself.
Lockean
Sorry.
Lockean view of property just without the homesteading of land, basically. I know that I'm right. Go ahead. Anybody who's watching the stream, if anybody wants to highlight exceptions or try to point out anywhere where Henry George's theory functionally does not align with how Locke describes property, then like with the obvious exception of land titles being not property, but there's for some reason, but there's not even an internal reason for that. But yeah, it's the same fucking theory of property, just except it's immoral to claim land for some reason. And that's literally from what I have seen of Georgism, that's it. There's no sophisticated theory about why someone like it's why it's not property to claim land, just that it causes a bunch of economic problems to establish land titles as a property norm, which is absolutely right. And I don't think that, and from what I've seen about the economic argument of Georgism around land, which I am familiar with, some of their observations can be validated from the Austrian perspective. And by the way, I am familiar with the economics of Georgism, just not so much the social theory. But because I know it's just Lockeanism without land.
Seems about right. I can't comment on
Well,
this.
Lockean property, just Swedish ANCAP. I think it's the Lolbert version of the feudaling. Well, the ANCAP movement is the Lolbert version of feudaling, but yeah, just a different expression of it, I guess. Same general problem though. That property norms and property making claims about property from the perspective of ethics are not the same thing. I'm just being. If that was too much of a spicy take, well, incomplete. The ANCAP movement being the Lolbert version of the feudaling. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Just the normalization of feudalism.
Oh.
But if anybody takes objection with that, I'm again not attacking you as a person, but I'm accurate, and what I'm saying is accurate. And if you want to challenge me on it, debate me. No, don't. Like, don't approach it like I'm like there's teams here. But yeah, I can absolutely explain myself in greater detail in response to any question you'd have on that topic.
I really don't have interest in debate, not insinuating that you do, but my reasoning is just that it actively impairs any kind of discussion or discovery by forcing people to have emotional investment in having one particular take or another, and at that point it just becomes a contest of wills, for want of a better term, where people basically are just trying to
you're
way to impose their own understanding of what's right onto everybody else without any kind of. Sorry.
Yeah, you're. I was just gonna say, yeah, Swedish ANCAP. You're right. My commentary might be getting a bit too spicy at the moment. If it is, if it is, I apologize because I'm a little stoned right now. But yeah, I don't have any problems towards anybody in the ANCAP movement. Like anybody who is identifying with it, I think well, let me rephrase that. I don't have any problems with people who identify as ANCAPs and currently think currently think of themselves as being associated with the ANCAP movement. As people, I do not have a problem with you.
Mm-hmm. And of course, just because you identify that label does not mean that there is any kind of anything wrong with you as a person. Whether or not you whether or not it is in your interests to identify with the ANCAP movement is entirely up to you. That said, I think we've given our reasons pretty effectively as to why it is that we ourselves cannot do so.
All I said is that all I said, yeah, exactly. I was more so being playful with that statement, but in a literal sense, well, all that it really does is just make people think that the way liberalism frames property is how libertarianism frames property, and the result of political economies operating around that pretext, how liberals treat property, has resulted in the modern state of political economies where it's really obvious that they're trying to construct a new model of political economy where essentially you just have something that's functionally identical to feudalism, but where banks also play the role as industry guilds. Like basically the new political economy is going to be you get loaned like a truck that essentially functions as an automated restaurant, and you have to spend 10 or 20 years paying back the loan on interest, but it's okay because you have the truck the rest of your life. Just as an example, that's the sort of economic model the state's trying to set up, but they're not going to succeed. Not going to succeed because it relies on the assumption proprietary organization models will continue to be able to sustain themselves.
Which they're already having a lot of trouble doing just right off the bat. And that's not me engaging in wishful thinking. Just I swear every other day there's like a story of massive layoffs occurring at one major corporation or another. Just recently it's like heard about UPS laying off thousands of workers. A lot of the conservatard media is trying to point out, oh, there was a massive UPS strike late in 2023 last year, and look at what happened. Now they're just laying off lots of workers. Whether or not there's actually a connection there, I can't say. It's possible, but it's
but
it's just like these.
My point was just.
Sorry if I paused for a moment. I just wanted to finish up this thought real quick. It's
Go
just
ahead.
that these, like, they want to try to declare some kind of ideological victory over this, which, in my opinion, is very petty. But nonetheless, they're mistaken in that this is anything except a ploy by a corporation to keep their stock values up. Because I mentioned before, it's like announcing and carrying out huge layoffs is a very cheap and easy way for companies to increase their stock value when they're normally bleeding money. That's just because it gives the impression to investors like, hey, this company is restructuring, they're going to become leaner and more efficient, so therefore we should give them money. Yay, profits. Whether or not that's actually the case, well, not really up to me. But
There's, yeah, and like I don't like you remember that internal memo that was released by by the St. Louis Fed in like 2022 of them trying not 2022, it was 2023, and I know it was 2023 because they were discussing the implications of LLMs and how that's affecting the white market and how that affects the commercial value of real estate. And what they were basically pointing out is that LLMs becoming incorporated into political technique um, essentially guarantees like that a pressure was just created that they will not be able to avoid a market crash happening really soon because of that. Not really, not like as in a prognosis or anything, but basically they pointed out how them being incorporated into the political economy made their already tenuous ability to continue functioning way worse because it made signals being created for the purpose of marketing research and in the wage market unreliable.
Well, can you blame them?
Which yeah, they were discussing strategies for how to deal with this problem, and they came to the solution. Like, the conclusion that they came to was essentially to just rely on barriers to entry. So basically, they have no way of dealing with the problem that we're talking about here. Even internally, they don't have any way of dealing with it.
That does,
And so
they'll certainly try, and they'll try a lot. But
So if your impression of the state is that they're confident right now and they look at you like you have no recourse, actually they're shitting themselves and they look at you like you're am and you haven't realized that you're am.
am
That's
am in
basically how
reference
the state's looking at you right now.
am in reference to
Am it
the story slash video game slash book I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which is the name of the
Yeah.
AI. Just to be clear for people who didn't catch that. Right. So
Yeah.
like the fact of the matter is, like, with AI, kind of extending on the conversation from yesterday, it doesn't matter if somehow this, say, Biden were to fall asleep on his desk and his head were to rest on a button that would cause all of the large language models on Earth to just stop existing. Because the technique for large language models exist and people have a point of reference for how they work and how to construct one. Which means that if people want if anyone with the right number of skills or the ability to attract people with the right number with the right skills, get them together, they could just make another large language model bot. So it's
Yeah.
too late. There's nothing it can do.
So yeah, it completely ignore their propaganda model. Look at the way that they're actually like trying to be like coordinate their behavior internally, or simply look at the performed implications of how they are trying to strategize. They are not acting like they are in a position of confidence. They're acting like the French nobility right before the French Revolution. The Soviet government during the collapse of the Soviet Union. Take your pick. Compare what's going on right now to any period like that, and you're gonna see the amount of the similarities just stacking up.
Mm-hmm. I said earlier that in relation to the United States government putting forward these images of their commanders blundering around with memes is the image they specifically want to project because, again, Sun Tzu, look weak when you are strong. Like, these guys, as I said earlier, with MK Ultra, wrote probably one of, if not the most comprehensive book on human psychology ever written. So there's like no way in hell these people don't know how this works. But I bring this up because I'm trying to recall I'm sorry, I'm trying to recall my own thoughts. I'm bringing this up because they want to appear.
Glad that's not just me, at least.
Yeah,
They want to project strength.
they want
That's
they
where you're going.
yeah they want to appear weak where they are strong, but they also want to appear strong when they are weak, and so that's the point of them engaging in the actions that they are, making themselves appear to be great and mighty, and this force that can't possibly be overcome except by trying to subvert it from within through, of course, a political process. But the fact of the matter is that their ability to coordinate their own resources internally are increasingly becoming compromised, not because of anything related to political action, because God knows that doesn't work. It has to do just with people figuring out, hey, large language models are not only neat, but they're also useful. And because of the nature of AI being more or less free from human biases, it liberates people from having to be subject to what's the best way, or what's the best term here? It liberates people from freaking hell. Like, I'm really sorry, you guys. I'm having trouble coming up with my own thoughts as well. So no, so it is. I can confirm it is not just you.
Well, the problem is not coming up with thoughts. It's the chains of implication get very, very long, and sort of like I don't really know what to compare it to, but it gets hard to maintain that after a certain point, and I have to direct an increasing amount of concentration to the task to maintain it.
Yeah.
In some cases, and that's why that happens.
That actually makes sense, and
Because
that does describe how I'm feeling, because yeah, I'm trying to follow certain tasks to their logical conclusion. It just becomes increasingly difficult to follow the further that it goes on.
Yeah, it starts to become like a trance at a certain point where you're just kind of just directly outputting your thought process, and you're thinking about what you're saying. You're not really internalizing anything else except just that thought process.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Right now, I'm just thinking about this, how large language models affect the state's ability to coordinate internally and coordinate resources. I mean, for one thing, one of its big implications is that they've created themselves is that you need, like, I'm pretty sure you're aware of the dead internet theory, and just in particular, just the prevalence of bots.
Yeah, that's not what I'm laughing about, but go ahead.
Yeah. I think even people who don't think the way we do, can already see where this is going. Where the fact that so many people on Twitter and so many corporate entities rely on bots just to be able to give themselves the illusion of popularity and allure necessarily entails that that it's impossible for corporate firms, whether that be like advertisers, big data, or governments, to be able to determine what people actually think insofar as it's relevant to their business model. So they have a very great difficulty coordinating resources based around an understanding of the preferences of people who, aren't them.
I was laughing a second ago, because I'm just looking at the title of the stream now, and I love how, because of how the stream played out, it now comes off as ironic.
How so, if I may ask?
The Backalley enjoys Palworld in all caps. and why Twitter artists want you to hate it. That's the title of the stream, and then you click on the stream. Yeah, so World War III is coming, and your body is basically an influencing machine trying to kill you inside of itself.
I'm sup- I would. I mean, at some point, people are just going to get used to that. Having a completely innocuous title, meanwhile, the actual content is just something only tangentially related to that topic. There is going to be a connection.
I'm
But it's
legitimate.
going to take people a while to adjust to that kind of mood whiplash.
I am legitimately not trying to be like depressing or in any way like pessimistic. It's just that those are the rules that I have to navigate around because that's just the way things are.
Yeah, it's
At
like we were
least as
talking about.
far as I.
Yeah,
What
just
were you gonna say? Sorry.
yeah, just it was just like these what we think about our current situations isn't really relevant to what is actually happening, if that makes any sense. It's like we're not trying to like get people depressed, although I can definitely see why someone would reach that conclusion. Rather, it's just like in order to be able to operate outside of ignorance, you are going to have to realize some unpleasant truths. And yeah, I mean, one could easily, or one takeaway could easily just be the doomer takeaway. Though I don't think the doomer takeaway is particularly useful for a multitude of reasons that I don't think I really need to get into. But just where I was going is that the doom that if you actually do have truth and are operating from truth, not any kind of sense of the truth, but just based on you're just operating based on factual information, then
Like a
you can inform your actions on the basis of how things actually are, which in turn will lead to
like
more
you're
accurate judgments.
what you mean is like a sense of certainty in your own decision making because you don't have reasons to doubt the conclusions you come to because you know you can demonstrate the rules that you're using would show that this emerges whether or not your perception exists.
Yes.
Just to clarify, because truth in that term kind like unless you know what we're referring to, using it in that way kind of like in an abstract sense comes off weird.
Yeah. That's what
I
I
don't want
meant.
to send any I don't want to send any crooked I don't want people to internalize any crooked, like to the extent that we can help it, interpretations of anything that we're like anything that we're talking about, especially because of how intimately a lot of it relies on functionally describing something that it's very difficult to explain to another person that doesn't have context to understand it, and the context to understand it's not exactly something that a lot of people will come across. There's a lot of situations like that keep emerging where having the context to internalize those things means I have to adjust my at least as far as the way I think about things in my own thought process. I have to adjust them pretty radically from the way that other people seem to approach them. So there's always like a degree of translation there. But anyway, I don't even really remember what the original context of that topic was. Just yeah, problems.
We have situations. I think it's the safest way to put it. And unfortunately, there is no easy way to solve them. I'd like to, but yeah, just hopefully there's a way for people to be able to get information from us in such a way that actually empowers them. Because we want people to be empowered. We want people to realize that as dire as the situation is, there is good news. You're not going to be hit by a Wasraeli bomb because you are not in that part of the world. So how much it affects you
Yeah, it
is
gets
entirely up to you.
all you really need to do is just, find friends. Don't try to make your transaction the basis of your friendship with them. Just somebody that it can be anybody, just as long as you're drawn to each other out of common interest. And then base what you do off of that internally. Like the economic model that emerges out of that, just base that off of what you guys want to do and strategically try to avoid situations where you're put in situations where you have to where norms are created that requires you to perform tasks outside of your control in order to maintain the relationship, which it sounds somewhat complicated, but actually if you know how to identify those influences, it's not really. Basically just don't get into any debt traps, don't take your wage cage too seriously, and understand how to spot controlling dynamics in relationships.
All this is well within your capabilities, and there is one thing that I absolutely positively, probably the most important thing to understand, I think, for like everybody, particularly our listeners. Uh, Neither Esso or myself are any more or less smarter than anyone else. Context, we just have context, which can be learned, which can be understood, and although imperfectly, it can be communicated. And our way of being able to internalize these concepts are going to be unique to us, but that's fine because you're going to be developing context that's going to be unique to you, and there's going to be things that you're going to be really, really good at that we aren't. So,
I thought you said longer at first.
I have longer context. Also, that wolf is eating that guy again. Oh,
That's 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 not that's not what I'm laughing about, but yeah, it's also pretty funny to think about context being something described as being longer.
my context is long. Don't ask me how that works. I mean, just if you want to know how it works, just ask Todd Howard. It just works. Yeah, that wolf is just eating people.
Yeah, I see that. Uh King's Jack asks, "What's your take on Palworld being hated again?" TLDR that the people who hate it are just hating it because they see it as a challenge to IP and they tangentially view that as a threat to their interests because for some reason they have a perceived vested interest in the maintenance of IP, therefore completely disregard their opinion unless their opinion is based on a metaphysical foundation that you have reason to you have reason to consider an accurate statement, basically. Like don't just take the tribalistic approach, obviously, of oh they have this take about Palworld and therefore nothing they say is worth considering. No, just I mean follow the reasoning of it, but there's a good chunk of them where the reasoning of it is exactly how I described, and it's really obvious in the way that they describe their problems with Palworld and how it relates to their life. And as a result, I just don't take their opinion seriously as like intellectual from an intellectual perspective, and I don't think that anybody else, should, at least from my opinion either.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Mine's
gist of it.
mine's the same way. They see the destruct. They're Pokemon fans, I would imagine, and they see that, or they see Palworld as an existential threat to the future of Pokemon. At least that's the impression that I get from it. Whether or not that's accurate, I'm not sure. But they likely see Palworld as some kind of like adversary, an actual competitor, and one that is very obviously overwhelmingly successful at that. Now, I am a Pokemon fan. People who know me know that. However, as you can see in the stream, I am currently playing Palworld, and you know why? Because it's actually a good game. Compare that to Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which was so hilariously under-optimized that they rendered the entirety of their open world all at once for some reason, and perhaps even more amusingly, they have an area of ocean, like Paldea region in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet takes place on an island, and the entire ocean, for some reason, is rendered in the open world. And when I mean ocean, I don't just mean like the area surrounding it. I mean like the actual body of water surrounding the island is larger than the oceans of the Earth.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing something about that.
But that's not even the worst case of optimization. The skybox is 3 times larger than the Earth. Just think about that for just a moment. What went wrong? This guy has a gun and he's helpless against me stabbing him.
Well, anyway, I think that we've been going on for about to the better end of 3 hours now, so I suppose we could talk with chat for a bit. Does that sound like an idea?
Yeah.
I mean, we were addressing questions throughout the stream, but now we're just now we can just talk with you guys directly. And would you guys like that, or would you like it if we just ended here and then went into the Discord? Yeah, it's called Palworld, Pikachu. I'm surprised you haven't heard of it. If you haven't heard of it.
I mean, I remember actually, like, before the stream started, I clicked on the video, and it did, like, you know how, freaking hell. If I were to find this stream in one clip, it's just the wolves eating the human corpses. This has happened, I didn't even know that was a thing until today, and it's happened 3 times.
Oh yes, draw that because this stream needs a thumbnail.
I will not draw that.
That. Yes, draw that because the stream needs a thumbnail and not for any other reasons. Oh well. Let's see. Why wouldn't Lockman's expansions upon the Austrian method completely kneecap consequentialism? It would completely kneecap the conceptual foundation of any normative claims about behavior. So yes, by implication, it would. In other words, the idea that propositions or axioms can define claims of truth about the nature of societies. No, they fucking can't, because it's the actions leading up to the thing that is being studied that define what is even being studied. So every single interaction is a unique thing that's being observed. Has its own context because every single person has their own context for what they perceive themselves to be doing in that specific instance, and that changes gradually over time because their perspective and it's not even necessarily the same thing they would do in every single case, just because of, you know, they're running these common rules doesn't mean they're going to come to the same conclusions. just means that essentially games how they see things. Other pressures could emerge. You know, in the same way that it's possible to become disillusioned with the state in a society that has a state.
I think it's safe to say that's
That's
true of
exactly, yeah.
most of us.
I suppose into the gore again. Yeah, that's a simpler way of putting it. More straight. It creates a sort of economic calculation problem, but for the idea of making normative claims itself, that as a concept, that it functionally doesn't describe anything to try to predict a claim about behavior, because it's not how observations about behavior work. You can only make claims about behavior if there are specific instances of behavior to be observed, and every behavior is its own specific instance, because every interaction is unique. There's so really what it shows is that if you want to make claims about the observation of society from a praxeological perspective, then it's more so about observing them from the rules which allow you to identify how a phenomena emerges. Basically, you're trying to describe the rules for how to identify um like how to identify what counts as something. You're not trying to, you're not trying to prescribe an axiom that dictates the meaning of something. Which generally I can't think of a context where that's logically valid in general, because any form of proposition is essentially just going to create circular reasoning, or at some point is going to create a presupposition. If you could show me the clip that you're referencing, I'd love to see it.
Well, that's what it was like.
Thoughts
Okay.
on thoughts on posthumanism. I suppose it depends on what you mean by that, but that conscious existence is eventually going to not be exclusively dependent on the human body, if that's what we mean by posthumanism, and that would emerge because of the fact that people are conscious. That is going to be selected for event if people gain more control over their brains, if that's what's meant by posthumanism, which is generally that's more the how I would frame how I came to that conclusion. But yes, I would say that I generally have come to that conclusion as well. Which the abstract form of what posthumanism is just, well, I kind of explained it, that after you're sapient and you become and after something is sapient and becomes aware of the function of its own sapience, which people invariably have, then then what will happen is information will be selected for gradually instead of the environment, as far as what people prioritize, um, as far as why, like what they focus their existence, the center of their emotional reasoning around, and what that causes is a situation where people start selecting. I'm having a very hard, I'm having a hard time articulating something that I know how to express. It's just how to phrase it is kind of the trouble I'm having here. Basically, people will select for having more control over the environment because the more that your emotional reasoning becomes centered around having control over yourself and able to direct that, um, that starts to be your default way of thinking about how you approach everything is just approaching meaning that way. Um, it's how you think of the implications of technique, the economic model you base your life around. Well, essentially, what'll happen is because of the fact that technique also selects for information, because of the practical necessities of maintaining organization models at this point, invariably because of the direction technique has already taken, it's not possible for people to eventually get to the point where they're anything other than information beings. And I could explain a lot more of that, like in much greater detail if I had the time to refer to like the nature of consciousness and the mind itself. And I don't really, and that's why that is going to like my explanation there is you're probably going to need to fill in the lines the blanks quite a bit, and most people aren't going to be able to. So I'm sorry. But that is what I think is that what people describe as posthumanism is essentially an inevitability.
You kind of have to. It's the only way to the entailments of sapience necessarily means that you're either going to have to take control of your own evolution or you just die. It's the ultimate.
Yeah, because if
It's the
you
ultimate adaptation.
because if you don't start centering the fact that you're sapient, then your default is still your emotions being gamed by environmental pressures. Basically, you have to stop that. You have to prevent that from happening, or else it will happen, and you'll eventually lose your consciousness, or not. You won't eventually. You'll find yourself in a very similar situation that I recently became cognizant of, and that like we've been Heretic and I have been talking about, and some of the phenomena we've been studying is relating to. I'm not really going to get too into that though. But anyway, I think do you think we should start wrapping up the stream here, or
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, this even though the stuff we talked about here was definitely needed. I was kind of hoping that the stream was going to going in was going to be a bit more, was going to be a bit more lighthearted. I guess sorry to anybody who was expecting that, but it didn't come off that way. I still hope that at the very least, it was a great stream. I feel like I had a great time. Just delay kind of fucking sucked, but
Delay was not
anyway.
ideal, but we make do with what we got.
And well, Palworld installed for me at the end of the stream.
Oh, finally.
That is exactly what would happen. But all right, well, anybody else has anything to say in chat? We can address it before we go. Heretic, you have anything else you want to talk about before we go?
Uh, no, not really. I mean, the main things that stuck out to me, at least in terms of uh, news, which admittedly is probably a weakness of mine, probably will continue to be, in terms of me wanting to keep up with current events, is just ongoing attacks by militant groups against the United States, or against the United States military bases, and nobody seems to be questioning why the United States even has military bases in those parts of the world in the first place. But yeah, that's what's going on.
That's where I'd be looking as well if, I were just stating my own preferences. But all right. Yeah, I'm glad that you enjoyed the stream, March Scarf. But yeah, we're gonna go ahead and head out because I'm starting to get tired. We've been going on for 3 hours, and I'd like to talk. I'd like to hang out with some people in the back alley. So if you're not already in the back alley and you'd like to join and have a chat with us, well, we're in voice chat most nights. Well, I haven't been in the last like few months, but I will. I'm gonna start getting in more regularly because I need it. I need I really freaking just need to talk with some people at this point some of the times. But yeah, we're gonna go ahead and stop the stream here. Thanks everybody for watching, and we appreciate it.